All right, Tony, we are live on Facebook. It is just past 6 p.m. on Wednesday the 14th, so I will turn it over to you, my friend, for part two of I Broke My Face, so you don't have to.
Thanks, Mike. Do you like how I'm laughing at my own title? Like it's my own title, and yet I sometimes wear our we get a kick out of the things that we're already doing. What's up, my friends? Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Amanda, for joining. Mike, I don't know if we're able to also drop the Zoom link in the comments of the live stream as well,
Absolutely.
but awesome. So if anybody else would like to join live, please do. If you just want to watch on Facebook, that's cool too. But what's up, my friends? Thank you for joining. This is I Broke My Face So You Don't Have to. Talking about how to maintain our physical and mental health. And if you missed last week, or if you're not following me on social and you don't know the story of how I broke my face, well, then you're about to find out. But I'm going to share it all with you. Basically, I had a very not so fun thing happen to me that I'll talk about in a little bit. And it really just highlighted to me just how important it is to take care of our physical and our mental health. And so with that, I guess a better title of this, or a more accurate title, because the whole I broke my face so you don't have to thing, it doesn't really say what it is that I do or what it is that we're talking about. So let me just spell it out for you right now. I broke my face and it was stressful as hell. And I hope you never have to go through something as stressful as this. But if you do, here are some things that I wish I knew in hindsight. And so, I hope this will help you too now. I think that's pretty accurate. But before we go into that, what's up, my friends? My name is Tony Rossi. I grew up in Melrose. I went to Salem State in 2006, graduated in 2010, had a theater degree, music minor. And then right after that, I moved out to Chicago. And honestly, it wasn't so great when I first moved out here. It was interesting. So in the upper left, you see me trying to look cute with my Red Sox paraphernalia. And I'm trying to be silly. This was like selfies before selfies were a thing. I took this, I think I took it with I didn't even have a webcam built in, had to buy a webcam to stream so that I could talk to people back home and do video calls. But if I'm being honest, this is kind of how I felt for the first year I was in Chicago. I was by myself, rooting for my Red Sox when everybody else is rooting for the Cubs or the White Sox. And I didn't have many friends. And I did a show. It was called A Million Little Zombies. It was about as good as it sounded. No offense. Oh, shoot. I just realized we're streaming on Facebook. It was one of the best shows that graced the stages of Chicago. No, it was not a good show. I did really appreciate all of the friends that I had met who are in that photo below, though. And if any of you see this, shout out to all of you. A lot of you, including Cassandra over there, are really inspiring me even to this day. But there I was in Chicago trying to do this acting thing, but I didn't have a lot of friends. And I think we underestimate how hard times are when we're going through them by ourselves. Thankfully, it got a little better. In the upper left, you can see me and a group of friends that I made through a Salem State connection. And a lot of those people in that upper left picture, they're from Marblehead. And they came out to Chicago, got introduced to them, and they were one of my first core groups of friends. In the bottom right, you can see me with a bunch of Packer fans. I'm going to be honest, I don't feel one way or the other towards the Packers. But this group of people like the Packers, so that night, you better believe I liked the Packers. I actually connected with a couple people, also with New England ties. They turned out to be Packer fans. They introduced me to their group of friends, and within a year, I had a solid group of friends. And so when we're going through tough times, when we're trying to maintain our mental health, last week we talked about the physical health, but this week we talked about the mental health, you got to take into consideration the people you surround yourself with. And a little bit later, I'll go into the scientific reasons as to why this is so important. So this was me in 2011. I think that upper left picture was actually 2012. And so it took a little bit of time. And that's another big theme for when we're going through tough times. time really matters, but the people you surround yourself with matter too. But speaking of time, just a year later, it got worse. And if you were on the call last week, you heard me talk about this. I had been in Chicago 3 years at this point. I was waiting tables, doing my acting thing, had an agent, got a couple cool commercial auditions, but still, was trying to find my way, navigating the acting scene. And while this was not the restaurant job that I worked at, it was pretty reflective of it. If you didn't recognize, this is the Harry Potter closet, the closet under the stairs. And, Harry Potter would go into that closet because that's all he had. But Harry Potter was going through a tough time at that point. And honestly, I was going through a tough time at this point in my life. The restaurant that I worked at was not the most conducive work environment. It was really disorganized at the time. I worked with a lot of really cool people. But if I'm being honest, I was really strung out. I was really burnt out, high anxiety. I think it's fair to say I was pretty depressed at this point. And I remember this one day, this was December 2013. So 9 years ago now. I went to the basement of the restaurant where we had a closet under the stairs. I went into that closet and I just bawled my eyes out. And I was just miserable. And that was low moment number 2 of when I was into my Chicago journey. And I remember thinking, I guess I'm just going to have to feel this way until I'm, a working actor. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Even to this day, I'm not a quote unquote working actor. I'm working more. But even this past year, I've barely been acting. I've been doing more stuff like this, doing more webinars, doing more coachings. But the biggest thing that helped me during that time was I started to change the content I consumed. And the content I consumed was a lot of self-help books. Now, I'm going to be totally honest. Even to this day, I am not a big reader. The only books I had read at the time were the Harry Potter books, ironically. So going back to the theme of Closet Under the Stairs. But I started reading these self-help books. And at first, I hated it. Until I noticed one day when I was biking to my new day job that was slightly better than that restaurant job, I noticed I felt a little better. And then I noticed each day I started feeling better. And I started incorporating these better habits. Things like writing down 5 things I was grateful for every night. And the next thing I knew, I was a lot happier. And it was all because of the content I consumed. And so just 5 years after that breakdown in the closet under the stairs, I was working at this place. This is a place called Built In. It's a tech company based in Chicago. And I worked with them from 2018, a little bit of break during the pandemic. And then I went back and I worked for them up until a couple months ago. And instead of working at this restaurant that really I wasn't happy at, I was working at this place instead. I was working at a place where I could dress like this, literally how you see me right now with the not perfect shirt on, jeans, and a beer in my hand. Okay, I didn't always have a beer in my hand. But that beer, they had it available for us, not just when we were having parties like this one. And it all started from the content that I was consuming and the habits that I started building from the content that I was consuming. So things that matter to your mindset, that make a difference when you're going through tough times, it's the content that you consume. So the people we surround ourselves with, the content we consume, and the habits that we build. Those are what got me through 2 of the toughest moments I had in Chicago. And then this summer happened and I had time number 3 that was really hard when I was in Chicago. And to be honest, this wasn't, this was the good part, okay? Baseball is one of those things that makes me happy that has nothing to do with everything else that I do, right? And so here I am this past summer at a minor league baseball game. No, it wasn't a major league baseball game for the Cubs. No, it wasn't, like this high profile thing. This was a tiny baseball stadium in the Chicago suburbs, but they had a home run derby. I was geeked. It was my form of self-care. And here I was with a baseball in my hand that I had just caught. And I'm like, man, what a great night. And then that night turned out to be not so good. We talked about this last week, and you probably gathered that this was coming based on the title of this workshop. Long story short, I let my guard down as the night continued. And at one point, I hear everybody around me raising their voice. I'm like, "Ooh, something's happening. Is there a baseball coming?" And I turn and I feel the biggest force of impact against the left side of my face I've ever felt in my life. I was diagnosed with a broken orbital floor, which is the bone right below your eye, as well as a broken cheekbone. Saw a surgeon the next day. He said, "Yeah, I recommend surgery for you." Talk about tough times. So what did I do after that? I started getting better. And if you were on the call last week, and by the way, if you hear me alluding to this call last week, Tony, what was part 1 of this? Scroll down on the Salem State Alumni Facebook page. You'll see the live stream. You can rewatch the whole thing for free. But I started getting better. And it was because of the healthy habits that I had in place. So this week we're talking about mental habits, but last week we were talking about healthy habits, and I started getting better. And thankfully, I was able to cancel my surgery just the day before after having a conversation with my surgeon. Now, after that, I really needed something to look forward to. And previously, I had been training for a marathon. And I remember talking to my hairstylist, Brio, one day. I shared this story last week, and Brio's like, "So, how's the running going?" And I'm like, "Brio, I just broke my face. The running is not going. I can barely go for a walk right now." I was physically exhausted just from going for a walk around my block. And that was one of the habits I had in place. I would go for walks. I was like, "Brio, I can't go. I can't do the running right now." And he goes, "But you have that marathon coming up." You see, I had been training for the Chicago Marathon. And I was like, "Brio, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it." And he said, "Well, I think you should." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "I think you'll be impressed with what you're capable of." And I was like, I don't know. I don't know, Brio. I don't think I can do it. And the next day, that's when this picture was taken. I signed up for a 5K. It was a White Sox 5K. You run around the White Sox baseball stadium, you end the race inside. And I felt a lot better. I realized I was a lot more capable of doing something that I didn't think I could. And so I reset the goal to run the Chicago Marathon. 3 months later, I crossed that finish line of the Chicago Marathon. But all the while, I needed a support network around me. I needed to really monitor the content I was consuming. I needed to give things time. And finally, and this was a theme we talked about last week, and we'll revisit again this week, I had to just try. I had to just try doing that run, even though it didn't feel like something I could do. So when it comes to the things that matter to our mindset, especially when we're going through a tough time, your support network, your habits, the content you consume, give it time and then just try. You might be surprised what you're capable of, even when you don't feel like it. And with that, let's check in. I just told you all how I felt during these really hard times. How are you all feeling right now? If you're watching on Facebook, let us know in the comments. If you're watching this like a day or so later, write it in the comments anyway. Tag me, Tony Rossi. And Amanda, feel free to let us know how you're doing in the chat. I see you're saying a couple things. Maybe they rethink. Yeah. I'm just reading the chat right now. It says maybe they need to rethink saying head stuck in cover makes more sense. You know what, Amanda? It's interesting. I was thinking about that. And when everybody started to, I was wondering, like, what could I have done to avoid that? I went through a lot of guilty feelings right after that happened. And I remember thinking, why didn't I just cover my head? Why didn't I just do that? One thing that I'll say is that when you go through something really traumatic, you're going to go through all the reasons in your head of how you could have avoided that traumatic thing. And in some cases, it may be helpful if you're going to be in a similar situation. In this case, for me, it wasn't helpful. I spent so much time beating myself up. Maybe we'll have to save that for another workshop. But I spent so much time beating myself up for trying to wish things could have been different. But really, what I'm grateful for are these habits that I had in place, the support network that I had. So that really helped me. But with that being said, check-ins and intentions. This is something that I do on my podcast, the Actor Problems podcast, which, by the way, if you want to check it out, it's also something where I go through my journey from the injury to the healing process, to the marathon, and lessons I learned along the way, things that we won't be covering tonight. So feel free to check that out. But the check-ins and intentions are 2 to 3 words for how you're feeling right now. And then setting an intention. How would you actually like to be feeling? You see, a lot of times we feel kind of guilty, or I'm sorry, we feel more like a victim to our feelings. We feel like this is the way I feel and it's just the way it is. But what if we could just set an intention, not to have this magic woo, if you like the woo-woo, that's okay. But not to have this magic airy fairy, I'm just going to jump and skip my negative feelings and get to the positive ones, but rather, how are you actually feeling? But setting the intentions for how you want to feel. So right now in the chat, 2 to 3 words, how are you feeling right now? I'm going to be honest. I'm feeling pretty tired. I don't know about you all, but this time of year, I remember it being fun and light. I just feel like I have so much work to do. I'm grateful to be talking to you all. I'm so grateful to have my clients. I'm grateful for my podcasts that I have to put in, that I'm choosing to put a new episode out for. But if I'm being honest, I'm tired right now. But if I could set an intention for how I want to feel, I want to feel excited. I want to feel grateful to be doing this. I want to feel grateful that you're all here. Oops, hold on. I skipped one. And I want to feel, oops. I'm trying to see the chat. Oh, okay, that's where we went. And I want to feel, this is what happens when I multitask. I want to feel accomplished, not in the sense that I did it, but I did it and I did a good job. So that's how I want to feel. Amanda says, I'm okay. I'm trying to be more gentle with myself and trying to remind myself that it's not reasonable to expect myself to build Rome in a day. Yeah, that's a hard reminder for me too, Amanda. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So with that, let's dive in. What can we do for our mental health during tough times? Well, we're going to revisit those themes I just talked about. We're going to talk about the community and the importance of it. We're going to talk about the importance of the content we consume. And we'll hopefully leave you with some action items that you all can do, whether you have that community, whether you have those resources to go to or not. But first, let's talk about community. This is a picture of me and, excuse me and some friends when I hosted a live version of my podcast. I mentioned that it's the Actor Problems podcast. It used to be called the Tony Rossi Show. And this was, oh gosh, this was September 2018, and I hosted the Tony Rossi Show live. And right before it started, I was like, no one's coming to this. No one's going to care. And at this point, I had been in Chicago 8 years. But I was like, no one's going to be here for this. Like, why am I even bothering? And thankfully, these folks showed up. There were 2 others. They ducked out early. But people showed up. And it just reminded me the importance of community. But now let's talk about the importance of community, because I can tell you about why it's important. But I decided to look into this a little further and thought, okay, how important is this? And what data is there? What is the science behind it? And what are the experts saying? Not that, I did Tony Rossi, not perfect expert, but what are the other experts saying? Well, let's talk about the health risks of loneliness. This is from the CDC. Although it's hard to measure social isolation and loneliness precisely, there is strong evidence that many adults 50 years or older are socially isolated or lonely in ways that put their health at risk. Recent studies found, by the way, heads up, trigger warning, we are going to talk about suicide and depression, so just a heads up that is coming up. Social isolation significantly increased a person's risk of premature death from all causes. A risk that may rival smoking, obesity, and physical activity. Social isolation was also associated with about a 50% increased risk of dementia. Poor social relationships characterized by social isolation or loneliness was associated with a 29% increased risk of heart disease and a 32% increased risk of stroke. I think at this point, you get the point. I can go on and on talking about how loneliness is really bad for you. And by the way, I just want to pause. This is something I talk about with my clients. So let's just pause, zoom out. We'll pull back the lens and let's just kind of highlight what might be coming up for some of you. It can be very easy for us to see this as a problem, and we are in the middle of a problem when we're talking about these things. Let's just acknowledge we are where we are, and let's go back to setting that intention. Okay, I might be lonely now, but what can I do? And just think about that. You don't need to know the answer right now. But it's very easy when the news, for example, is showing us all of the dangers of these things to think, oh, well, that's how I am. I guess I'm just going to have to be subject to these things. Not necessarily. Let's set the intention. Remember, that's why you're here. You're here to learn more tips about maintaining your mental health. So just see these as the facts that they are, not as you are locked into these statistics. And that being said, let's look at some more statistics. What does loneliness do to the human brain? This is from a from a doctorate, Dr. Catherine Peters. She says loneliness can change the neurochemistry of the brain, turning off the dopamine neurons, which trigger the reward response and causing some degeneration in the brain when the reward response is not activated. Now, I'm highlighting all of this because I talked at the beginning how my first couple of years in Chicago were really lonely. But the first couple months after my injury, and I haven't talked about this too much, but I was feeling kind of lonely. And in a minute, I'll share how it wasn't entirely true. But physically, I was by myself. And if I'm being transparent, I didn't really want to be around other people. You see, I mentioned this last week, but my senses have been really, really heightened. I got these spidey senses now. My sense of smell is better. My sensitivity to light and sound is better. Sensitivity to sound is very unpleasant. I don't enjoy that. There are times where I open a can of sparkling water and then I'll put it down. And then a few minutes later, I'm like, what's that? It's the bubbles. I can hear them, but I don't know what it is at the time. But all my senses were really heightened. And so I wasn't really enjoying being around large crowds of people. I also mentioned I was physically exhausted. So I was feeling some of these things of loneliness. Thankfully, hold up. Thankfully, when you have friendships, they can make you live longer. Now, we talked about the bad things that happen when you're lonely, but let's talk about why this is. We are designed, we are hardwired for connections. Modern science has revealed that our brains have been hardwired for social connection since the Homo sapiens times. But right nowadays, we're more disconnected. And like, I'm kind of a hypocrite right now because I'm not talking to y'all in a live room. There are benefits to digital connection. And I'm going to share some examples of that in a little bit. But let's just also take into consideration, we feel this way because we're designed to feel this way. So I want you all to set the intention right now. Leaving tonight, what are you going to do to be around more people? And I'm going to call myself out on this because even though now I'm 5 months out from my injury and I'm a lot more out and about, having time with people in rooms is still lacking in my life. Thankfully, that's about to change, but this is one of my bigger challenges. Now, I will say, going back to that time that I broke my face, I had people reaching out to me who I hadn't talked to in years. I had one friend reach out to me on LinkedIn from Salem State who I hadn't talked to in years. And she said, Tony, I saw your post. No need to reply, but if there's anything I can do all the way from Mass, don't hesitate to ask. Another Salem State friend who I hadn't talked to in years said, I saw your post about getting clocked by a baseball. I'm glad to see I'm glad to see that you're in good spirits, but if any point you need someone to talk to, just reach out. Y'all, this did so much to my mental health. So I'll also say, if you're on the other side of this and you see someone else going through it, reach out. Even if you think, oh no, they're too busy. Oh God, they don't need somebody else reaching out to them. Don't make that decision for them. Let them decide that. And if they are too busy, they'll take their time responding. I took my time responding, but these messages right here, they meant a lot to me. So take advantage of help from others. It can also feel really easy to feel guilty getting help from others. But again, we just talked about, number one, there's health implications. Number two, this is literally changing your neurochemistry in the brain. And number three, let's also take into consideration that we are hardwired for connection. And if you don't have a strong support network, these are some like basic baby steps that you can start with. And by the way, let's just call a spade a spade. Making friends as an adult is hard. I got really lucky because, yeah, man, right, Amanda? Making friends as an adult is hard. Like in school, you are put in places and situations where you are just around people all the time. But if you don't get along with your coworkers, and by the way, I skipped that part of my story. My very first job in Chicago was a toy store called Timeless Toys. And I'm very, very grateful for all of the people there who hired me and who I worked with. But we didn't hang out outside of work. And so that just made my loneliness even more strong. So when I share these resources like meetup.com, like Eventbrite, if you go to these events, you can meet people. Now, I also want to point out, and I'll talk about the Bumble thing in a minute. The Bumble thing's kind of cool. I also want to point out this isn't about making a best friend right off the bat. Sometimes that happens. But also, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, sometimes you make friends, and at first they're just kind of casual, but friendships take time to build. So when it comes to connection, realize this stuff takes work, and it takes being intentional. And by the way, talking about the CDC, we talked about some stats from the CDC earlier. When it came to COVID, the CDC did a meta-analysis of over 500 US hospitals, over 800,000 US patients. Feel free to fact check me on this. I don't have the stats below. Feel free to look this up. As always, when it comes to information like this, fact checked, look it up on your own. But this was the CDC. They said the top 4 risks of hospitalization from COVID. Number 1 was obesity. Number 2 was fear and anxiety related illnesses. Fear and anxiety, this stuff matters. And again, you would think that with this being number 2 on the list of over 800,000 US patients who were put in this randomized study, you would think that this would be talked about more. It's not. So this is why it's all the more powerful to take this into our own hands. So finally, Bumble, it's a dating app, but there is a friends version. Uh-oh, I stopped my screen. I'm sorry. There is a friends version on Bumble. You just set it to friends, and you are there to connect with friends. With that, I'm going to take a quick sip of water, and it looks like Amanda said something in the chat. Amanda said, did you ever experience profound loneliness where even if you have people around you, the loneliness goes past that? Yeah, Amanda, that's a good point. So you can still feel lonely even when you don't physically have people around you. And I think that kind of goes back to the story I was saying where I was at work and I had coworkers, but like we talked, but we weren't friends and nothing bad between any of us. But I think being around other people, the social connection goes beyond that. And by the way, again, feel free to fact check this, but I was listening to this on a podcast called The Model Health Show, where if you think about how we're hardwired for connection, an example I heard is that once upon a time, we depended on other people for survival. Like when we lived in caves, we would depend on other people for survival. So that's why this stuff matters. Because we needed people to survive. So when we talk about loneliness, this is so much bigger than just having a friend to chat with. So I think when it comes to the people around you, yeah, it's not just having the people, but it's the connection and the idea telling our brain, I am safe from these people. I will just say, and I'm just reading something in the chat, I will just say that Bumble is one of my favorite dating apps, me personally. Now, I'm biased because I'm a guy, and it's an easier app to be on when you're a guy because the guys don't make the first move. But anyway, maybe we'll do a. I will not be the person doing a webinar on dating apps, but that would be funny. Okay, so we talked about connection. Let's talk about the content we consume. So I talked about the importance of having a strong support network and the people who are rooting for you, and my hairstylist who told me, hey, you should do running. And I said, no, I shouldn't. And then I did it because it made an impact on me. But what I didn't mention was that I needed stuff to really fuel my brain at this point. Now, thankfully, I talked about how I had habits in place and where I was reading books. And these days, I don't read many physical books, but I do listen to audiobooks. And I do listen to podcasts. One of my favorite podcasts is called the Secrets to Success podcast. There's a motivational speaker named Eric Thomas. He's a former high school dropout. He was homeless for a while. He went to college, dropped out of college, 12 years later, eventually got his degree. Today, he has his doctorates. He's one of the top motivational speakers in the world. And he has a podcast along with his teammates, CJ, Carl, and Jamal. And they have a podcast called the Secrets to Success podcast. I was already in the habit of listening to this podcast every day, but I put this podcast on just a few days after my injury. And they're talking about getting through tough times. And they're talking about being resilient. And all of a sudden, with my low energy and I'm going to have surgery soon. And at this point, I hadn't run that race. And I was like, I don't know if I can run this marathon. I started to feel inspired. And so that told me, okay, I got to pay really close attention to the content that I'm consuming right now. Not just the content I'm already consuming. I need stories of resiliency. And that's when I looked up Adrienne Hazlitt. I had already known about Adrienne Hazlitt. She's one of the Boston Marathon bombing survivors from 2013. Adrienne Hazlitt was not running that race. She was spectating. She was one of the top ballroom dancers in the world. I want to say she was formerly like number 2 or number 3 in the world. She didn't know much about the Boston Marathon. She wasn't from Boston originally. And she was just working so hard at her craft. She never had time to really explore or learn about the Boston Marathon. But one day she was walking on a day off. She hears everybody cheering. And she's like, what's that cheering? And she goes over and she looks and she says, hey, what's going on? And people are like, you don't know? She's like, no, I don't. They're like, this is the Boston Marathon. And she goes, how far is that? They're like, a marathon is 26.2 miles. And she says something along the lines of, wow, that's a lot of running to get a participatory necklace and a banana at the end of the race. And they're all like, yeah, okay. But she's watching. She's like, okay, I think I've seen enough. And that's when the first bomb went off. The first bomb was not close to her, but she said somehow she knew another one was going to go off. And that one went off right next to her. She immediately lost the lower part of her left leg. And she was immediately like pulled in to a restaurant, like a kind Samaritan, like pulled her into a restaurant nearby. She was eventually amboed over to a hospital. They had surgery. And Adrienne said at the time, and this kind of goes back to our conversation from last week, her recovery went really well because she was already in phenomenal health and phenomenal shape. Because she was a ballroom dancer and her job depended on it. And so last week when I was telling you all, and even this week when I'm telling you all about how I went from that time where I had the broken face and then I showed you the photos of my face progression. I already had good health habits in place. And again, we talked about that last week. But the other thing Adrienne had at her disposal was she was already listening to she was already a resilient person. I don't know exactly what her habits were. I was already listening to those types of things. But after that point, I made it intentional to listen to stories from Adrienne Hazlitt. And I would listen to her stories. And y'all, the thing about Adrienne Hazlitt is she wasn't a runner before. but she is now. In 2016, she ran the Boston Marathon. In 2018, she attempted to run it again. But if any of you all remember, and I didn't know this, I wasn't in Boston, I was here in Chicago. But in 2018, it was freezing rain and kind of snowing on the day of the Boston Marathon. And so Adrian had to stop. A lot of people had to stop that year because the weather conditions were so bad. So she decides she's going to run it again in 2019. Adrian got hit by a car just a few months out from the marathon. Talk about going through tough times. Sometimes when we have setbacks, we have a setback to the setback, and that's what Adrian had. She was going to run it in 2020. We all know what happened then. 2022, Adrian Hazlitt not only ran the Boston Marathon, but she competed in the first ever professional para division of the Boston Marathon that she helped form. She finished in 4th place. Y'all, hearing these stories from Adrian made me think, well, what the hell is my problem? I got broken bones in my face. I can still run. And yeah, I had to build my strength up. And yeah, I had to make sure I wouldn't injure myself. And if you heard my story last week, I did injure myself running. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. But I kept listening to this type of content. So if you go to my website, TonyRossiCoaching.com/resources, I have a full list. And yeah, this is saying it's geared towards actors. This reading list is not just for actors. This is for anybody. I have all of the books and all of my favorite podcasts that I listen to and the books that I've read. The content we consume matters. And I promise you, getting from the broken face to going on walks to going to my first run to having a running injury and then running the Chicago Marathon, I needed to pay attention to the content I consumed. So the content you consume, it's going to change the way you think, especially during times of adversity. And like I said, it worked. It helped. And all I could think about was a quote that Adrian Hazlitt said when she first ran the marathon in 2016. And I think it was something that her former partner said to her. And she was freaking out. And she was like, I don't know if I can do this. And he said, what got you to this starting line is far more work than what it's going to take to get to the finish line. For me, just getting to the start line was the win. But I knew I had to finish that day too. And in 5 hours and 37 minutes, if I was an hour after that, the street cleaners would have been like, yo, buddy, get on the sidewalk. But I was able to finish that race. And I'm going to tell you all right now, my next goal is to run the Boston Marathon 2023. No, they are not accepting applications anymore. And no, I do not qualify for time. And you can get in with a charity. Most of the charities are full right now. I'm currently on 2 wait lists. I just applied for a 3rd charity. I will find out by Friday whether or not I got in. But I have another really, really hard goal. So you know what I'm doing right now? I am listening to nonstop Boston Marathon podcasts because I need that content. And when I see you all in Hopkinton, which is where the starting line is for the Boston Marathon, I'll be able to say I did it. And I'm not going to lie, I feel a little bit of anxiety saying this to you all on live right now. But the content I'm consuming is fueling me right now. And this is after years and years of reading all of these self-help books. So I believe I can do hard things. And I hope that you all believe that too. So let's recap. We talked about me graduating from Salem State, moving to a studio apartment where I got really, really sad, making friends, feeling a little bit better, but then working a restaurant job that made me kind of hate my life for a little bit. Found a better job, started reading self-help books, felt a lot better, and then I took a baseball to the face. Y'all, I've been through a lot. But I'm guessing if you're watching this, you've been through a lot too. So let's address the elephant in the room for a minute. You might be thinking, okay, well, this is all well and good. I know it's important to have friends. I know it's important to pay attention to the content I consume. But like, where do I start? You just said so many bad things are going to happen to me if I don't do these things. Where do I even start? Well, The good news is you're already doing it. So first of all, y'all are on a webinar for your mindset. You've taken step 1. Step number 2, you're on a webinar for the Salem State alumni. And if you're part of the Salem State community, guess what? We have an event every year called Pomp. And I went to that event 5 years ago. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't see too many people that I was super close with. But I saw a lot of people that I used to kind of know. And over time, these people in these photos have become really good friends. And this goes back to my conversation in the beginning. Sometimes the friends we make in the beginning, we don't have that powerful, friendship. And even during my time at Salem State with these people, we weren't like BFFs. But I consider some of these people BFFs today. And so if you don't have that support network, come to Pomp this year. I'll be there. I'm going to fly in. I'm going to come to Pomp. It's going to be fun. Come say hi. And again, not with the goal of having 10 best friends, but just make some connections. And then maybe ask later, assuming that they don't fly back to Chicago after, hey, you want to hang out sometime? But you start small. Don't be weird. But just come. And then when it comes to our mindset, again, you are on a webinar for your mindset. Salem State has these webinars all the time. I'm not going to lie. I thought all these people in this photo right here were Salem State alum. I'm like, these are really smart people. They're not all Salem State alum, but there are free webinars that you get to tune into. And if you go to that link at the bottom, you can tune into some of those as well. Be ambitious for yourself and the world. That sounds really cool. How to elevate your communication style. Oh gosh, how do I keep stopping the screen share? I apologize, everybody. How to elevate your communication style and be your best, even under stress. That's what I needed at the time. Y'all, these things are out there. And you are literally taking step 1 towards these things. So friends, do not underestimate the importance of communication. Do not underestimate the content we consume, because this will help us get through the tough times. And if you're not going through a tough time right now, fantastic. Start these habits now so that you can have them in place to have that better foundation. Last week, we talked about the importance of foundation so that you can build a foundation for those tough times. And then you have the habits in place. You can double down on the specific type of content that you need and take advantage of your support network in the meantime. So friends, this is I broke my face. Goodness gracious, how did I stop the screen share right as I was at the most powerful moment of the webinar? I'm just kidding. This was I Broke My Face, 2-part series on how to maintain our physical and mental health, especially during tough times. My name is Tony Rossi. Mike Mitchell, I don't think you're here anymore, but if you are, feel free to tune in. But otherwise, everybody, thank you so much. If you're watching this on the recording, say hi, or tag me in the chat. And if you have any questions following up this, shoot me a DM. As Amanda will tell you, it might take me a couple days to respond, but I will respond. And just know that this stuff's hard. This is the stuff, please, you have to come to some random webinar that some alumni you may or may not know is talking to you about this stuff. We're not taught this. I say this to my actor clients all the time. You're not taught this in acting school. No offense, Salem State. I love you to pieces, but we weren't taught this. It's because we're not taught this as a whole. This isn't a part of the curriculum. And finally, I just want to put a call out. If any faculty are watching this, if you would like me to come talk to your classroom, I would love for this to become part of more curriculums, particularly in the arts and the entertainment community. I think that one of the reasons so many actors are suffering is because we're not taught how to set that mental and emotional foundation. And when times get really, really, really hard, we break. And not only that, we see stories in the news. We see stories of celebrities. We saw one today of another celebrity who took their own life. And y'all, it's not just about the success. It's about the foundation of which we build the success. And then there's the health component piece. And we talked about some of that today. Amanda says we should be taught this. I don't know what else y'all need to hear. This stuff matters. So finally, I've said finally like 5 times, but again, if you're a faculty, please reach out to me. My email is my name, tony.rossi@gmail.com. And if any of you are hurting, my name's Tony Rossi, please reach out to me. And if you're not comfortable reaching out to me, reach out to a friend. This stuff's hard. We are not taught this. And it is a lot easier for us to focus on the negatives, as we talked about, because we don't have the right content in place and we might not have the right support network, or even if we do, are we prioritizing it? Thank you all so much, my friends. And something that I say at the end of every podcast episode, we can be messy and we can still get the things that we want. I will talk to you all soon. Hopefully I'll be back for another webinar. And if not, connect with me on Facebook, connect with me on Instagram, Tony.Rossi. That's Tony with a Y, Rossi with an I. Hashtag not perfect. Let's go get them, my friends.